Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp April. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is April 3rd, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send us your questions and comments via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them in the chat page. Now, we're in the midst of an incredibly tense moment of history. Where there have been a series of developments in the last days which threaten to turn conflicts into regional wars and even a world war. There was the Israeli strike of an Iranian consulate in Damascus, Israeli murder of 7 aid workers from in Gaza, as just a couple of the atrocities continuing there. And then there's the knowledgeable counterterror experts have basically pointed to MI6 and CIA as likely behind the attacks on the Crocus hotel events in Moscow, the mass murder there. Now, the first question is basically taking up this question of the strategic crisis and the growing tension. It's from a contact in Oakland, California, who writes, Helga, how close are we to world war? And how can Western leaders be so foolish or evil to keep launching such dangerous provocations?
Well, I'm not in a position to say how close we are, but we are very close, because both of these so-called regional crises in Southwest Asia and in Ukraine have both the immediate potential of escalation, intentional or not, by accident or not, but it's enough to be absolutely sleepless. And I would wish that more people would get sleepless nights, because if we are sleepwalking again, like we did sleepwalk into World War I, and how, World War II was also something which could have been prevented. And now we are about to do the same thing with similar arguments, hooray for the war, against Russia, demonizing entire countries and systems. But I think what is most worrisome, something which has appeared both in respect to the United States and Israel, and that is the apparent and obvious disregard for international law. And, I think the most ominous and most glaring example is the US responding to these resolutions and decisions by the UN Security Council with the argument that they regard them as not binding. Now, that worries me the most, because, if the United States sticks with that, we have a system which is the United Nations. You have the International Court of Justice, which makes decisions, recently, very clear in respect to what they want from Israel to stop the genocide there, which was completely disregarded to the maximum. But also, when the International Court of Justice makes a decision, it goes to the UN Security Council for implementation. And, if then, the United States was practically making the UN system defunct by continuously vetoing any such decision, but in the very recent one, they abstained, which meant that the resolution passed. But then, when the White House or State Department spokesman was asked about it, he said, we regard this as non-binding. Now, that means, if the UN Security Council, which is the only existing and actually highest institution of international lawfulness, rules-based order, if you want, if that is being disregarded as non-binding, then we are really in for trouble, because that means that, there is no institution which can be appealed to, and we are entering a complete state of jungle of lawlessness. And obviously the same thing happened now with Israel, with the attack on the 7 aid workers from the, I think it's called the International Kitchen, the International Aid Kitchen, which is in charge of delivering food to people all over the world, but especially now also in Gaza. And, as the information now goes, this was obviously pre-announced that this convoy would drive and go on, because nothing happens without checking with the IDF in Gaza. And then the attack occurred, killing 7 people. Israel naturally said that this was a mistake. Netanyahu sort of apologized, but it is 99.9% impossible that this was an accident, because if you have such a tight situation, that this would be, it's a complete violation of any rule. And that means, if we are not capable of remedying that in the short term, I mean, we have a situation in Ukraine which is on the edge. We have a situation after the Israeli attack on the Iranian Embassy in Damascus, which again is a complete, just imagine if Russia would have attacked the American Embassy in Luxembourg, or some place. What would have been the international outcry? But here comes Israel, and they attack, an Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing 2 high-ranking military commanders and 7 other people. I have not heard such an outcry at all. And that double standard, that is not hidden, that is being seen by everybody, by the global South, the global majority. And I'm, apart from this increasing condition of lawlessness, I'm really worried more by the day that the behavior of the United States, the British, the EU, Germany, in the eyes of the world, is becoming more and more despicable, incredible, and it will have a lasting impact. And now the division of the world as a consequence of that is increasing. I was just reading a highly interesting article by the Russian analyst Dmitry Trenin, who is normally a very level-headed analyst, and he basically describes how the behavior of the West towards Russia has caused a complete change in the orientation of Russia, that for decades they tried to be part of the West, to have good relations with the institutions of the West. This happened in the 90s, then they tried to adjust to the rejection in the 2000 period and 2010, but that now for a number of years, because of the behavior of the West, they basically have given up completely, and they are completely discounting relations with the West, turning to Asia, to China, India, the BRICS, this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, other organizations. And, while that is obviously a reaction and a blowback to these policies, I mean, in order to remedy the situation, I think we are really moving towards something much worse than a new Cold War, because if there is no more, understanding that we are the one humanity because of what is going on, I think the consequences could be absolutely fatal for all of civilization. So the answer to your question is yes, I think we are very close to a potential nuclear war, and it really should make everybody sleepless.
Now, here's a question from a prominent talk show host and podcaster who's very familiar with your work and the work of Lynn. He brought up this question of the talk going on in Europe of a Trump presidency and the need to prepare for that. But he said, meanwhile, he's watching events in the United Kingdom, and he wonders what you think of this, that you have the health scare in the royal family with King Charles and Kate Middleton. You have the collapse of support for the Tories and Labour, the reemergence of David Cameron, who was involved with Obama and the destruction of Libya. And he says, do you think the Brits are orchestrating a policy shift to deal with the failures in Ukraine and Gaza?
Well, if they do, I definitely have not noticed it, and I would be very skeptical because, all I can see is that the British in the recent period have been the ones always pushing ahead, putting troops on the ground in Ukraine, doing all of these things. So if I understand the question correctly, that you mean by a policy shift that they would stop that, I'm not exactly optimistic that I can see something. What I see instead is a relentless effort by NATO to cement the present policies. There was just a meeting headed by Stoltenberg proposing that NATO must adopt a so-called Trump-proofed policy by putting, all the NATO members under obligation to finance a package of $100 billion so that, even if the United States would basically not be part of that anymore with a new Trump presidency, that the present weapons to Ukraine policy would be continued. Now, I find that highly incredible because, there is no way how this war will go on for much more time, because we are clearly reaching the limit, and many international military experts are basically saying that, simply for manpower reasons, the Ukrainians cannot keep up this war much longer. And therefore, what is this NATO policy for permanent continuous warfare all about? I think that NATO should really dissolve. I think they should have dissolved 30 whatever years in 91, the latest, and they lost all raison d'etre, and they clearly have transformed from a North Atlantic defensive military alliance into a global offensive military alliance. And I think, the voters in every country would be well advised to vote in such a way that, that cannot be maintained. Not that voters' voices mean much these days, but nevertheless, there must be a mobilization to change that. So I don't know. I'm not optimistic about such a change, or I may have missed it.
Well, sort of a follow-up question from John Nunez. He asks, do you think the US, UK, EU, and NATO will peacefully surrender their dream of a unipolar world hegemony, as the Soviets did in 1991, given the failure of their policies?
Well, I'm afraid that the answer to this is a glaring, loud no, because, the Soviet Union in 91 dissolved peacefully, no tanks. They agreed to earlier already to the German unification peacefully. And, that was, in a certain sense, luck, one of these rare star hours of history, which, was completely, utterly missed. Now, given the entire direction of NATO and the US, British, EU increasingly, they are so much geared towards militarization, military-industrial complex, that I cannot see that they would peacefully dissolve. What could happen is some unexpected developments. I mean, as things go now, especially with the possible background coming out after this terrorist attack in the Crocus concert hall near Moscow, I think the Russian resolve to absolutely punish those who were behind that, and to, I think they will go for a military solution in Ukraine, whatever that may lead to. So that could happen. That may catch some Western people by surprise. I think there is an awareness about the danger of an escalation, for example, to a question of a parliamentarian in the Bundestag. The scientific advisory service of the German parliament answered that question by saying that even if France is putting NATO troops into Ukraine, that does not automatically mean that the Article 5 of NATO is being evoked or can be evoked, because it's a national decision by France, which does not involve an attack on France. So I think people are aware of it, but is that enough? I mean, one has the feeling that, that there is, I was just looking at this in a different context a couple of days ago. The mood before World War One was insane. And, people were saying, let's get to war, hooray, let's have war. And, there was a war lust. And people had no idea that this war could be for 4 years and end in bloody, fighting in the trenches where the French and the German soldiers in the trenches of Verdun would move back and forth, killing each other in an absolutely senseless killing. And, by the end of that war, nothing was accomplished. What was accomplished was the death and the destruction of an entire generation of Germany. People were derooted, and that being derooted plus the imposition of the unjust measures of the Versailles Treaty meant that it was just a stepping stone to World War II. And then basically the same thing happened again, this time, especially with Russia. So I think if you compare this really insanity articulated by some politicians who say, let's carry the war to the territory of Russia, this is insane. Albert Einstein, who has some reputation of being a genius, wrote the famous sentence that if you keep doing again and again the same thing and you expect a different result, that is the definition of insanity. And I think that is exactly what we are seeing right now, because, what led to World War One was this demonization of the supposed enemy and geopolitical motives, and we are seeing exactly the same thing playing out again. Naturally, the predicates are different, the history is different, but the principles of motivation are the same. So I think that we are in a very, very dangerous moment, and I can only ask all of you, if you share my concerns, then join us in our International Peace Coalition, because we are trying to make people more aware of the danger and get them to adopt solutions which still can stop this.
I have a couple of proposals from people about how to address the situation. One is someone who asks about the request by the Palestinian UN observer today that Palestine be accepted for membership in the United Nations. Do you think that's a good idea? And then the same person also asked if we've approached wealthy Arab countries such as the UAE or Qatar to support and help fund the Oasis plan.
Well, I think both should be done. Obviously, I think the establishment of a Palestinian state, even if it would not immediately be recognized by Israel, obviously not with the present government, but it would send a signal. Now, I have not studied that proposal from the standpoint of the international law feasibility, but spontaneously, I would answer with yes. On the second question, I think all the neighbor states of Israel and Palestine should invest into their own future, because it is so obvious that if the entire Southwest Asian region is being destroyed by war, and right now, we are really. Just imagine that if the Iranians, who up to now have tried very hard to not be drawn into a general war, Hezbollah has reacted relatively modest. They could have responded to these, repeated incursions coming from the Israelis, which they then answered, and so on. But it was all kept on a very low level, because obviously everybody understands that if it comes to a full-fledged war between Israel and Iran, even the use of nuclear weapons is not a taboo. Iran is extremely close now for some time with Russia and China. We are looking into the eye of World War III. And, even if it does not go that far, if it just would be a general war in Southwest Asia, leading to the destruction, leading to more people, displaced people, impoverished people, terrorized, traumatized youth, you have the next generation of terrorism right there, and that would be something any country in the region has to fear. So that is the whole aim of our Oasis Plan idea, that it is not just about Israel and Palestine, but it definitely is asking all the major countries of Southwest Asia, and including the neighbors, reaching even into Central Asia and beyond, into South Asia, because all of these countries should have, and really do have, a fundamental security interest that this region finally finds some peace and quiet development.
You're listening to Helga Zepp April from the Schiller Institute. The Oasis Plan she's speaking of will be the focus of a conference on April 13th that will be sponsored by the Schiller Institute, and you can register for that at the Schiller Institute website. Now, here's a proposal from Thomas, who's a regular contributor to the weekly show. He says the Global South, in his view, could bring the transatlantic financial system to its knees by letting the debt explode. I cannot see any other way to change the financial system to a more just and equal system except by destroying it. What are your thoughts on that, Helga?
Well, that may happen simply because, there comes a point where countries come to the conclusion that, to remain in the present system does not give them any chance. Now, that is not a desired outcome because, anything which is chaotic, and you cannot, in my modest opinion, you cannot conduct such an operation like a surgical, precise thing. It will be chaotic. You will have collapsing currencies, collapsing markets, interruptions of the production chain. So, anything which is chaotic like that is not desirable for the simple reason that it can have unforeseen consequences. This could also trigger military actions of some kind. So I would really, as I said, it may come to that because if there's absolutely no willingness to enter a reasonable discussion, that may be the consequence. But the much more desirable road to go would be to do exactly what I suggested now, since the special military operation in Ukraine started, and it was a special military operation in the beginning. It was not meant to be all of Ukraine, and for sure not what it became now. I suggested a new international security and development architecture. And if you look at the 10 principles which I propose to be, food for thought for the beginning of such a discussion, it has emphatically the proposal of a new international financial and credit mechanism, a new credit system in the tradition of the Bretton Woods as it was intended by Franklin D. Roosevelt, not exactly what it became, because this was after Roosevelt was dead. And the best feature of it, which was the idea to have much credit, long-term credit for development of the Global South, elevate the living standard of the Global South. That was the key part, what Roosevelt had intended. But since his untimely death, Churchill and Truman, fixed it such that it only helped the prosperity of the so-called advanced sector. But nevertheless, this idea of a Bretton Woods system with gold backing, with basically fixed exchange rates, that is a roadmap, a measurement where one could start, and such a new international security and development architecture must absolutely include an orderly reorganization of the financial system. Now, are the forces in the world ready to go that rational road? I can only hope so. Um, and if not, it may come to what you say.
Okay, now someone wrote in and said, any comment from you on the conversation between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden?
Well, that is a tiny ray of light. According to the readouts from the Chinese, they were very positive on this discussion. They regarded it as a continuation of the San Francisco summit in person of about a year ago. And they basically give very high importance to the fact that Biden, committed to the one China policy, to not supporting Taiwanese independence, and basically Biden, I think, said also that the relationship between these two countries is the most important consequential in the world, which nobody can deny, given the fact that these are the two largest economic powers in the world. So I think with modest, expectation, I would say that is definitely good and better than the alternative.
Okay, we have from again another regular contributor, Damascus, who asks what channels would be acceptable to parties for de-escalation, and then he asks if there aren't such channels, can people's power make a difference?
Well, there are channels. You have, I think, very important Pope Francis, who in his Urbi et Orbi message on Easter was again very, very powerfully demanding peaceful solutions to the two major crises, a negotiated peace, ceasefire, and he called attention especially on the victims, the children, and others. So I think the Pope for sure is such a channel, because he is definitely someone who is non-partial, who is trying to really be in the spirit of Christianity, and therefore he has a very important reputation among all the other religious leaders. So I think that channel should be definitely used and emphasized. Then naturally you have other channels. You have China, who made a proposal both for Ukraine, a 12-point peace proposal. There was a Chinese envoy in the recent period traveling in the region. China also made a proposal for a comprehensive Middle East conference, which unfortunately they're not very active in promoting as far as I can see right now, but that's a channel for sure. I would think that there are probably other channels of goodwill people, but I think this is obviously not enough. So I think the fact that there were in Germany over Easter 120 Easter marches was important. They were a little bit bigger than last year, not by far not big enough. I think such demonstrations in the street are extremely important. You have, for example, right now, also very important, a young man whose name is Herbert, wait a second, Larry Hebert, 26-year-old inactive Air Force member who just started a hunger strike in front of the White House because of what he sees in Gaza. And he wants to do that in support of the self-immolation of Aaron Bushnell. And he says that one of the things, first of all, he was in the department where the continuous weapon sales from the United States to Israel are being shipped every day. And that is what he is protesting against. And he said what freaked him out the most is the absolute silence on the side of the superiors, the higher up in the command, on the death of Aaron Bushnell, that they did not find any mention, not any word. And that, again, shows you the absolute division of the establishments and the people.
I have a couple more questions for you, Helga. The first one is from a professor from Algeria who wrote in about the nuclear deal just signed by Algeria and Russia. And he said it seems to point toward a potential for growing energy independence for African nations. This, in my view, is a positive step away from the old colonial relationship. What is your view of this?
I think this is excellent. I congratulate Algeria for this deal because, that is obviously the way to go. You need high energy, flux density, energy sources. It also, is an indirect polemic against the stupidity of the European Union, who wanted to have the North African countries to supply all kinds of green energy, which, is not going anywhere. And soon Algeria will be a more powerful economic country than Germany if Germany continues on the green road, which is not what I want, but that's how things go right now. So I want to encourage your country and all other countries to continue on that road because, fourth generation nuclear energy is inherently safe. There are a lot of people who are still anti-nuclear, but they don't understand that, there have been tremendous, first of all, the anti-nuclear propaganda was based on so many lies and very little chance to correct them. However, even there were some weaknesses, but those weaknesses have been overcome. The fourth generation is inherently safe. You have the thorium cycle and you have soon coming thermonuclear fusion. So, that is really the way to independence. And nuclear energy and sovereignty are synonyms. So my congratulations.
Here's a final question for you from an activist. I just heard that you were interviewed by Kim Iverson. That's great, and I can't wait to see it. How can we get more exposure for you in the LaRouche movement, given the censorship against you?
Well, there is the Kim Iverson interview. We broke it down in segments. There's one segment on the Oasis plan and some other segments. So my suggestion, use those videos, send them to other broadcasters, send them to, or take this webcast, send the link to all the people who should be, broadcasting what our members of our movement have to say, because it's not, I would have better things to do, but right now there is such a vacuum of reason in politics that anybody who helps us to focus on solutions is so urgent, because there are even people who are against the dangerous policies promoted right now by certain circles, but very few people focus on actual ways out. And I think that because of the work of my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, the LaRouche movement, the Schiller Institute, we are, in a certain sense, a factory of solutions, because that's the method of thinking Lyndon LaRouche taught all of us. So therefore, help us to get the word out with the existing product and try to tell them that they should be part of. Oh, there's one very important development. I should end with a really positive note. There is right now a new resolution, which I just read just minutes before this broadcast started, by an actually quite large number of journalists from the first and second channel in Germany and the Deutschlandfunk, which is sort of the official radio. And many of them have signed with their name. Others have put their name at a notary because they still fear trouble if their name is known. But they make a strong protest against the effort to instrumentalize the public radio and TV to basically push the NATO line. And they are, calling on people to return to principles of journalism. I think this is fantastic. This is a really good development. And, that shows you that, if one organizes enough resistance, something can break. But in the meantime, join our efforts to get our message out, because until we get into these media may still be a little time.
I like what you said, Helga, about the LaRouche movement being a factory of solutions. That's one factory that won't be shut down by the deindustrialization movement. So, Helga, thanks for joining us again this week, and hopefully the questions that people sent in will cause them to do some thinking and some acting. And at this point, it's the activation that's most essential. So, any final words from you?
Well, I can only ask you, get your behind off the couch. I mean, that may sound a little bit, not so polite, but I really mean it, because this is the most dangerous moment we ever had. And if things go wrong, we may not exist. So, the danger of nuclear war is a very real one, and we have to change policy, because the present establishments obviously are, they obviously have caught some strange bug in their brain which hinders their thinking. So we need you get active with us, because it is more urgent than ever before.
Okay, Helga, thank you, and see you again next week.
Till next week.